Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something a lot of you have requested, a deep dive into the reliability of scientific research.
Ooh, yeah, that's a big one.
It is. And you even sent us a paper to unpack, which is really cool. It's called Why Most Published Research Findings Are False.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, by John P.A. Ioannidis.
Catchy title.
I know, right? Sounds a little intense, maybe even a tad dramatic. But we're going to break it down.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so the paper really digs into this idea of statistical significance, which is often determined by a p-value.
Yeah,
Anyone who's not a stats whiz,
right.
a p-value less than 0.05 is often seen as this magical threshold. You know, the one that makes research valid?
Yeah, you see it everywhere.
But Ioannidis is saying there's more to it than that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The p-value, a lot of people misunderstand it.
Yeah.
It's really just saying, what's the probability of getting your results if there's no real effect? Like, what if nothing's actually happening? It doesn't tell you how likely the finding is true in the real world.
So just because something's statistically unlikely, it doesn't mean it's impossible.
Yeah, exactly. Ioannidis uses this 2x2 table to show this. It's like a simple grid.
Okay.
On one axis is whether there's a real relationship between things.
Okay.
And on the other is whether the research actually found a relationship. This helps visualize how those two things don't always line up.
That makes sense. It's not enough to just find something statistically significant. We need to know how likely that finding is actually real.
Exactly. You got it.
So how do we do that? How do we figure that out?
Well, that's where positive predictive value comes in, or PPV.
Okay, PPV.
Think of a medical test.
That's
Just because it comes back positive doesn't mean you're sick, right?
Right.
PPV is what helps determine how likely a positive research finding is actually true.
So it's kind of like a reality check for research.
Precisely. And Ioannidis says a lot of research, even stuff in big journals, might have a really low PPV.
That's interesting. Why is that? Like, what makes research findings so unreliable sometimes?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Ioannidis has these 6 factors that can really mess with research findings and lower the PPV,
Okay, 6 factors.
like these hidden gremlins
Yeah.
messing up our science.
Gremlins. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me about these gremlins. What's the first one?
All right, so gremlin number 1 is the size of the study. Small studies, they often don't have the statistical power to detect true effects.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like trying to hear a whisper in a crowded room. You might think you heard something, but can you be sure?
Right.
And this is a big problem in fields like molecular predictors. Those sample sizes are usually small.
So bigger studies are better. They give us more confidence.
Exactly. More data helps cut through the noise. And gremlin number 2 is similar at the effect size. The smaller the effect, the harder it is to detect reliably, and the more likely you are to get those false positives.
So if the effect we're looking for is tiny, it's easier to get fooled by random chance.
Exactly. Like imagine trying to measure how a single raindrop affects the water level in a swimming pool. It's tough, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, 2 gremlins down, 4 to go. What's next?
Number 3 is the type of research being done. Is it more about generating hypotheses, like those microarray studies that test thousands of genes? Or is it more about confirming things,
Okay.
like a big phase 3 clinical trial?
So more tests equals higher chances of finding something that looks significant but is actually random.
Exactly. It's a probability thing.
Yeah.
More tests, more chances of those random blips.
That is fascinating. Okay, what about gremlin number 4? What is it?
Okay, so gremlin number 4 is flexibility and bias. And this is where things get a little tricky. Even for studies with strict protocols, like randomized controlled trials.
Really?
Ioannidis says that the flexibility in how you design the study, analyze the data, even choose what outcomes to focus on, all of that can lead to bias, even if you don't mean to.
Okay.
He even mentioned something called selective outcome reporting,
What's that?
where researchers might only publish the results that support their idea.
Oh, so it's like choosing the best photos from your vacation to post online. You only show the good stuff and hide the rest.
Yeah, perfect analogy. And that brings us to gremlin number 5, conflicts of interest.
Ah, yes. The money factor.
We often think about money, but bias can also come from just personal beliefs or pressure to get ahead in your career. How often do you question someone's motives when you see something?
Oh, all the time. Especially when it sounds too good to be true. Like when a study funded by a candy company finds sugar is good for you.
Exactly. And it's not always about lying either. Sometimes researchers really believe in their ideas and might unconsciously interpret things to confirm what they already think.
Yeah, it's like we all have those biases we bring to the table. Okay, so that's 5 gremlins. Small studies, small effect sizes, hypothesis generating research flexibility, and bias conflicts of interest. What's the last one?
This one might surprise you. It's the hotness factor. The hottest research fields, the ones with tons of researchers and competition, they might actually have less reliable findings.
Wait, really? That's counterintuitive. Wouldn't more people working on a problem lead to better results?
You'd think so, right? But it's not always true. In these hot fields, there's so much pressure to publish quickly and find something groundbreaking.
Yeah, I can see that.
It leads to this thing called the Proteus phenomenon. Research claims change all the time and contradict each other.
Oh, wow.
Everyone's chasing the next big finding, like a scientific game of whack-a-mole.
So all the hype and excitement around a field could actually be a warning sign that the findings aren't that solid.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes the quieter areas of research where there's less pressure might actually be more reliable.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. So we've talked about all these gremlins messing with research. But how big of a problem is this, really? Are we talking a few bad apples, or is it a lot of research that's affected?
Ioannidis actually tries to quantify it. He uses these simulations in a concept called R, which stands for pre-study odds. It's the likelihood of a relationship being true before you even do the research.
So R is like our best guess before we start the experiment.
Right, and Ioannidis shows that in a lot of research scenarios, the PPV can be really low, especially when the pre-study odds are already low.
So if we start off thinking something's probably not true, even a statistically significant result shouldn't make us too excited.
Yeah, it's like finding a $20 bill on the sidewalk. Nice, but you're not suddenly rich, right?
Right. Okay, I'm seeing how important this R thing is. Can you give an example of how it works in practice?
Sure. Let's say we're looking at whether eating a certain berry prevents colds. Before we even start, what's our gut feeling? Do berries have magic powers?
Probably not. I get colds all the time.
So our R value, our pre-study odds, would be pretty low. Even if a small study finds that berry eaters get fewer colds, we shouldn't go crazy.
Right. We need more evidence.
Exactly. We need bigger, better studies before we tell everyone to stock up on berries.
So understanding R can help us avoid getting carried away by single studies, especially when they're testing something that sounds kind of far-fetched.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All about healthy skepticism.
This is making me think about all those headlines I see about miracle cures and groundbreaking discoveries.
It's easy to get swept up in the hype.
It is, but it's kind of depressing to think so much research might be unreliable. Makes you wonder what you can actually trust.
It's true. A lot of research, especially in some fields, might have a low PPV. But that doesn't mean all science is bad. It just means we need to be careful about what we believe. One of the big takeaways from Ioannidis is that bias is often the hidden problem.
So it's not just about bad statistics, but about how those statistics are generated and interpreted.
Exactly. And remember, bias isn't always intentional. Sometimes it's just how we think or the pressures we face in our work.
Okay, so it's not about good scientists versus bad scientists, but more about understanding the challenges of doing science itself.
Right. And knowing those challenges exist is the first step to overcoming them.
So if bias is such a problem, how do we minimize it? Is there a way to make research more reliable?
Absolutely. Ioannidis has some solutions, and some are pretty straightforward. One is to increase the power of the studies, especially for confirming things we already think are true.
So bigger studies again?
Larger studies, especially randomized controlled trials, those are more likely to give you accurate results. And meta-analyses are really helpful too.
What are those again?
They combine data from lots of previous studies to give you a bigger picture.
It's like crowdsourcing the truth, getting a bunch of perspectives to see what's really going on.
That's a great way to put it. Meta-analyses can be really good for figuring out what's true when different studies disagree. But you got to make sure the meta-analysis itself is done well and includes good quality studies.
Okay, so bigger studies, meta-analyses, those make sense.
Yeah.
What about tackling bias directly? Are there strategies for that?
There are. One is upfront study registration. Before you even collect any data, you publicly say what your study design is, what your hypotheses are, and how you plan to analyze everything.
That's smart. It's like setting the rules of the game before you start playing.
Exactly. And transparency is key too. Researchers should be open about anything that could bias their findings. Like financial ties to companies.
Right, so people can judge for themselves if those ties might have influenced the research.
Exactly. And of course, following the rules during the study, analyzing the data carefully, reporting all the findings, even the negative ones, those are all crucial.
So it's not just about what you find, but how you find it. The process matters.
Absolutely. And remember that R value. Understanding the pre-study odds is huge for reducing bias and making research more reliable. Basically, before you even start a study, you need to think about how likely it is that the thing you're studying is actually true.
So if the pre-study odds are low, even a statistically significant finding shouldn't make us jump for joy.
Right. It's about looking at the bigger picture, not just getting excited about one study. Thinking about the pre-study odds can help us avoid wasting time and money on research questions that probably won't lead anywhere.
I'm starting to think this R value deserves its own deep dive.
I agree. It's a simple idea, but it has big implications for how we do science.
We've covered a lot today, from p-values and statistical significance to bias, and even those null fields where researchers might not find anything. We've seen how common false findings can be, and how even rigorous research like randomized controlled trials can be misleading. But what's the common thread here? Ioannidis says a lot of it comes back to bias in all its sneaky forms.
And we talked about the hotness factor. Sometimes the most popular areas of research might actually be the least reliable. It's like the more we know, the less certain we become.
Right. But the good news is there are things we can do to make research better. Larger studies, meta-analyses, transparency, upfront, study registration, all of that. But maybe the most important thing is to encourage critical thinking in science. So what's the takeaway? What do you want our listener to remember?
I think the biggest thing is to remember that science is done by people and people make mistakes. We have biases, we have blind
It's
spots.
not about throwing out all science, though,
Yeah,
right?
no way. Science is still the best tool we have for understanding the world. But we can't just take everything we read at face value.
It's so tempting to believe those headlines that promise to change everything, but we got to be careful.
You got it. We got to ask those tough questions. What were the limitations of the study? Was there any bias? Does this finding even make sense with what we already know?
And what about those null fields, the areas where researchers don't find anything? Those are important too, right?
Totally. Even research that doesn't find something new can be valuable. It tells us where not to look, helps us refine our methods, like clearing out the dead ends in a maze.
So it's about being smarter about how we consume research, but how do we actually do that?
Well, we've talked about some strategies. Look for those big, well-designed studies, the ones that have been replicated. Meta-analyses can be really helpful too.
So we're looking for confirmation, not just one study that makes a big claim.
Right. And don't forget about the pre-study odds that are value. Thinking about how likely something is to be true before you read the research can really help.
It's like that saying, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Exactly. Don't believe everything you read, especially when it sounds too good to be true.
I feel like I'm learning a whole new way to think about research. It's pretty cool.
It is cool. It's about being empowered to be a more critical thinker. Questioning things, digging deeper, and not being afraid to change your mind when you get new information.
So next time I see a headline about some amazing new discovery, I'm going to take a step back, remember all those gremlins we talked about, and ask myself, hold on, is this really as groundbreaking as it seems?
Love it.
Oh,
And remember, even if a study is flawed, it doesn't mean the whole field is wrong. Science is a process. It's always evolving.
it's like a giant puzzle we're all trying to solve together. We try different pieces. Sometimes they fit, sometimes they don't, and sometimes we have to rearrange the whole thing. But that's what makes it so exciting.
Great analogy. So to everyone listening out there, keep that curiosity going. Don't be afraid to question things and challenge what you think you know. Learning about research and how to evaluate it, it's a journey.
It is. Well, until next time, stay curious, everyone.